Welcoming everyone to today's interview, which I'm really excited about, and I'm also very much in this particular zone. So I want to welcome you to Jacko here, who you can see on the screen.
Yeah.
Jacko is a Master Oxygen Advantage trainer. That means that he's been given the green light by Patrick to actually teach in the way that Patrick teaches Oxygen Advantage. Whereas most of us, myself having just come fresh from the program, are Oxygen Advantage trained instructors, but we don't actually teach it. And a little bit about Jacko, who was formerly a professional rugby player. This is interesting, Jacko, actually, because we've just completed training with another former pro rugby player whose injuries were so significant that they also had to give up, and
Mm.
we'll come to that possibly.
Okay.
Anyway, loads of what Jacko has in his bio, I actually want to come out in this conversation. So I'm not going to say too much right now, other than to say welcome to the interview and let's dive in.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
It's a real pleasure actually, and it's like that. There's a kind of humorous banter I think between us,
Well, I
which
just like the way you said it's a pleasure actually. Yeah. And then all of a sudden, like, because we went all serious because we are doing the intro, and then
yeah, but it is because as you know, I've just come back from my training in Galway. I actually signed up 2 years ago during
right, wow,
lockdown
yeah,
online. And well, one, I learned much better in person, but I also
yeah,
value the online nuts and bolts in order to get me there.
yeah,
A bit like the way that we train, we have 8 months online and then an intensive, and actually that's where it all comes together.
yeah.
And that was the case for me with this. So I would love to hear more, and I'm sure our listeners would too, because many of them will already know you and many of them won't. But how did you come to be Oxygen Advantage trained, and what brought you to the breath?
Yeah, great question. And even one thing you said there, and then you said the master instructors teach the certification, so teaching people to become certified OA instructor. Once you are an OA instructor, you're teaching the principles. You're teaching it to your clients. I didn't want someone to get confused there when you said like, but we don't actually teach it. I was like, no, everyone is going to then teach it. It's just the what you're
Yeah,
teaching, if you know what makes sense.
yeah,
Um, yeah, I mean, I'll try and keep it. I'm terrible at keeping things short, but I'll try and keep it shorter and to the point because there's more interesting things that we'll be able to talk about. But yeah, I had a brain injury in training at rugby in the pre-season of 2013. So it was like August 2013, and yeah, it wasn't a one-off incident. I had a series of concussions throughout my career, and they're progressively getting worse. But we weren't really aware of the cumulative nature that they were coming to, and it all sort of made sense after whilst I was then trying to recover from this one. I had a seizure on the field and a small bleed on the brain, which you can see on an MRI scan. I had I didn't have the MRI scan straight away. It was like a few months later. I was actually trying to get back to being able to play, but I couldn't shift my symptoms, and so finally an MRI scan showed a scar, which was a result of the bleed and the seizure I had, and things started to make sense as to why I just seemingly wasn't able to get better. It took me a year to get over my symptoms, and it took about 4 years till I came across Patrick's work. And I think initially the first thing I came across was brain injuries effect on the gut, so the brain gut axis, and I'd had an ulcer on my tongue from like the day I got hit in the head for this injury, and I must have bit my tongue, and that never went away. And then I also had like skin issues that was yeah, just seemed to line in with like the time scale of like it seems to be when my brain injury was. So was looking at that type of stuff and it's like, okay, well, what else does if I've had a brain injury and that can affect my gut and that can make me have some of these skin issues and also this type of stuff, like what else is it affecting? And that's where a study, I can't remember which study it was now, that was linking brain injuries and affecting breathing. And it was like, okay, that's interesting. I've had a brain injury. Um, I think I've recovered by now. But there was something in me that felt like, the way I describe it to people is like, I'm sort of back to normal, what I think is normal, but it just feels like the car in the handbrake's just slightly on. Like there's something just not quite letting me like really flow and go. Um, and yeah, the idea that it could be breathing, it was like things would add up of going, like, well, one, I don't actually, how do I know if I'm good at breathing or not? Like, how do I know if I'm doing it? And it's like diaphragmatic breathing. Well, how do I know if I'm doing diaphragmatic breathing? I remember asking a physio friend of mine and being like, how do I know if I'm doing it? By looking at me, can you tell that I'm doing it? What's it supposed to feel like? And I couldn't really answer these questions. I went to a workshop with Richie Norton. I don't know if you come across him. He's an OA instructor, and a yoga teacher. He's done XPT with Laird Hamilton. Yeah, really really cool guy, really knowledgeable. And I said to him, we didn't do. It was like a lot of move. Anyway, it doesn't necessarily. But I meant after the workshop, I was like the breathing bit, like, and he's an ex rugby player as well. And I was like, how do I find out more? I want to dive deep onto can you recommend a book or anything? He said, read the Oxygen Advantage. It's a game changer. And I was like, right, that's good enough for me. I trust him. Like, so I'm not very good at. I just passed English at GCSE. I'm not very good at English and reading, and I read that book in about 3 days, and I was just like absolutely lapping it up, running around telling everyone. Well, not running around nasal breathing because I couldn't at that point, but shouting about to everyone that would listen, or even if they weren't listening, that they need to shut their mouth and need to breathe their nose because of all these things I've just learned from Patrick McGee. And I was sort of like, yes, evangelical about it, let's say. But it was related to my brain injury. It was like I'd done things like the Bolt score, and I was like 8-9 seconds, which put me in a category of like severe asthmatic. I literally, if you'd have said to me, have you got a problem with your breathing? I'd have been like, I don't think so. Like, it seems fine to me. And then the more of unpicked, like the mechanics, like, yeah, I mean, that's been a longer piece, I think, to really understand the detail and the nuances of that, and a lot of unpicking of basically part of a dysfunctional movement pattern as part of the breathing piece. But yeah, like sensitive to see everything that the research shows us now. I've done a bit of a deep dive for the last 6 months on breathing and concussion from one for me, but two for others, because I've had a brain scan now, a follow-up MRI scan 10 years later, and there is no scar on my brain anymore.
Wow.
Other people I've played with that have had similar impact injuries, but not quite as severe in terms of like one severe incident, theirs are worse. And it's a real problem in contact sports and particularly rugby. So there's one thing I know I've done different. I was lucky enough to find out that breathing had been affected, and not only will it be a good tool to help us understand how well we have recovered, because it will tell us about our nervous system as well, but it's not only a key thing to help improve like brain function, cerebral blood flow, and recovery of the brain tissue. It's
Mm.
essential. It won't, once your respiratory rate, your mechanics, and your end tidal CO2 has been altered from a brain injury or from any type of stress. It doesn't. This is an important point to make. Actually, someone listening to this, well, I don't have a brain injury. It's like,
Yeah.
that's just an acute stress that I had. You might have a lot of little stresses that have built up, and your respiratory centers respond in the same way to stress. It doesn't really matter what the stress is. So we're sort of learning, and yeah, it's not gonna go back to normal on its own. It needs
Mm.
it's created a new norm, and it needs to be recalibrated or retrained or restored, however you want to describe that. So yeah, for me it was about my brain health. Where I've gone into it now, I've noticed a lot of around the stress management side of things personally, as well as improvements in sports performance. The other side of it for me was like I'd got back to into running, and I was like, man, I wish I knew this when I played rugby. Like all of this, there's this like whole new it's like I've gone. It's like in your. I think it was Andrew Tracy was describing it. It's like you're at home. You've lived in your house for like your whole life, and then like you just find out that you got a basement, and in
Yeah.
under there's like all this cool stuff to play with. It's like, how did I not know that was there?
Yeah.
And yeah, in terms of performance, in terms of recovery, I just the work I do now in pro sports and particularly in rugby, because just that's my background, just comes out of a desire to share something that I wish I knew when I played, because we used to just absolutely blast ourselves. And not that the people still just do blast themselves, but we weren't given any tools with our breathing to help us with our recovery. We weren't given any tools with our breathing to help us like facilitate an improvement in our performance. And yeah, there's some really cool stuff in the sporting world that just lets us be a little bit smarter with how we're the adaptations that we're trying to create. And it's such an easy win,
Mm.
because with any, whether it's sport or not, with breathing, you're always doing it. It doesn't matter. I was with a physio yesterday. Sorry, and I'll shut them with physios, and they're saying they're thinking about, they're wanting to incorporate a little bit more recovery, breathing strategies into some of the recovery things they do post game. So that the day after the game, they come in and it's like they can do ice baths, or they can, some like to go on the spin bike, some like to do a bit of foam rolling, some do a little bit of a yoga type of flow that one of the coaches takes. And it's like we're thinking about putting it in as an option within it or whatever. And I says, hold on a minute, like you can do a part of the breathing piece for recovery in everything that you've just described. Like it can be and should be integrated. And there'll be times when we'll teach someone something in isolation, but only so that they can implement it into something that they're already doing. And I think that's where I get excited, and that's where I try and do what I feel is my most beneficial work for people, is helping them enhance, optimize, improve, whatever the word is, what they're already doing. So you're already doing something. Let's just tweak, let's just fine tune the way that you're breathing to give you the adaptation or the thing that you want. You want to recover better, do your breathing like this whilst you're doing your recovery thing. You want to improve your performance, well, we're going to put some of these things in. And yeah, that's where I've sort of come to.
Thank you for that.
Sorry, I will
Don't
just blurt.
apologize. No, well, I want you to blurt because our listeners want you to blurt, because that's what they'll be listening for. I mean, that kind of evangelical aspect that you spoke about, I get it. I get it. Having just completed the program, I'm I actually sent out a newsletter this morning, and most of my audience, as you know, comes from conscious connected breathwork, circular
Yeah,
breathing, open
yeah,
mouth breathing. I call it the 13th bad fairy sometimes when you go into these functional breathing places that go, whoa, and we'll come to that. But
yeah, yeah,
what I sent out was, I now realize how crucial it is. It's fundamental that people understand the science because of the safety, because of the integration. So you're talking about, people like needing to actually bring that into how they live and work
mm,
all the time. And I couldn't agree more that it's like, if we don't understand what's happening in the body, and we don't understand where we might be doing more harm than good, or we're just neglecting those parts of
yeah.
ourselves.
Well, it's like, look, a little example people might get. I've just thought of this now as a little analogy, like fasting, right? Fasting's good because of all these things. People tell us why it's good. That doesn't mean you should never eat, ever. Like what you do, if a hyperventilation practice is good for a certain reason, it's like, but what are you doing the rest of your entire life?
Yeah.
And if we're not, if we're, I guess it's where it depends where people feel that they sit. Are you a breath coach, or whatever you want to call yourself, or just are you a something else, some sort of other facility, whatever you call yourself, that uses a breathing technique to do something? And I'd probably say, but either one of those, if you're using the breath, you want to know what's going on, and also how to help someone to change and improve the way they're breathing when they're not doing the practice on
Yeah.
their hyper, like that. It's
And
so
because
critical for the whole piece of the puzzle, right?
Well, yeah, and exactly, and that's where we meet because it's like we are we're looking at helping people change their breathing because that's what they're doing the rest of the time. Why? Because we want to support people in changing their life, either emotionally, mentally, or physically. And all of those things are linked. There was a few of us having this conversation yesterday. It's like, we're not separate beings that it's like,
Mm,
well, you could work on your breathing and completely neglect your mind, and a big part of Patrick's work now, as you know, is
mm,
kind of all the stuff about getting into those flow states that you just mentioned and starting to recognize the monkey mind and when it gets busy, when it takes us out of awareness, because then that's when all the little stresses that you talked about that have as much impact as the big injury impacts
mm.
start to build up. And they don't just affect our breathing, they affect everything that we do. But I want to come back a moment to a couple of
Yeah.
things. How soon after you completed your training did it begin? You talked about this 6 month recently, like diving in and picking things apart, and there's a lot to pick apart. There were
Yeah, yeah.
moments in the training when I was like, "Oh my God,
Oh,
this is
yeah.
just too heady for me. Am I ever going to understand it?"
Yeah.
And then it would be like, "Boing, oh, okay."
Yeah.
So how soon did you go into working with pro sport players and rugby people?
Um, well, I mean, interesting. So I've been a strength and conditioning coach. I've like sort of retrained a year or so after. It took me years to get over my injury, and then I retrained. So that'd have been like in 2004 or so. Um, to working as a strength and conditioning coach, and worked a lot with Paralympic athletes. In fact, where you know you have to think outside the box a little bit because depending on their impairment, you can't just do your bog standard exercises because they might not be it might not be appropriate or applicable. Um, so I started to understand training and how the body moved in probably a slightly different way than the conventional sort of PT route. And I did the training because after reading the book, I probably got my Bolt score from like an 8 or 9 up to like a 15. And I did feel better, but I didn't feel like completely, oh wow, this has like been like everything, I wasn't feeling the same results that people were reporting that Patrick was sort of quoting within the original Oxford Vantage book. So I was like, there's something. I was interviewed Patrick twice on podcast and got on with him really well. And I was like, I just think I need to do the actual training with him. And you'd have thought that I genuinely didn't even think, well, I'll probably use this with some of the athletes that I'm training. Um, but I didn't. I don't know why I didn't even think it was. I was just doing it for myself. And so yeah, that's the only reason why I was doing it. And then because I'd done it, I sort of, I think once I've started something, I like to like finish it. So I did my case studies, and because I was only doing it for myself, I didn't actually really need to have the certificate, the qualification. I guess it was for my own education, but I really enjoyed. I was surprised at how much progress my practice clients made, despite me being brand new to it and not really understanding everything, but just giving them, following the protocols and giving them the stuff, and then making some really good progress, and it being quite, some quite profound changes for them. And I enjoyed the coaching of it, and it really opened up to me. I guess like, wow, you can have quite a big impact on people with some very simple things, which then takes away a lot of friction, or a lot of what's the right word? Like the barrier to entry for people is like zero, and it's like, who can you help with these? Well, anyone that's breathing. So that's everyone. Like, it sounds really obvious, but it just, that to me was like quite a, I mean, it's terrible for your marketing because you're like, you can't. It's like, what's your niche? Well, I'm just everybody. Um, but yeah, I loved the fact that it was like I could help potentially anybody here. Like, and that for me was then a game changer in my own, I guess, coaching. I had one athlete that I was working with to Tokyo 2020, and that obviously got put back to then 2021 because of the pandemic. um, and we did some stuff in his training, and then at that time, I guess I was just getting more and more into this, and I've been working with. It's probably the last 2 years, I think, within pro rugby. Um, yeah, I just I'm like a wind up. Like if I get excited about something, like I'm off and I'm gone. I'm like
Yeah.
those cases of Mega. I was like, who else wants to know about this? And yeah, I guess I started reaching out to people that I still knew. It was yeah, everyone and anyone. But it's something I say to coaches when I'm mentoring them is like at the start, like reach out to people that you already know that are potentially interested in how breathing might help them with whatever the thing is, if it's sport or if it's like focus and attention or is it stress management, like you got friends in corporate or you got whatever, like if you want to try and find some like go
Yeah.
to people that you already know, even if they don't know you. Like the first friend I spoke to, I mean, we'd played rugby together when I was like 16, and like I'm going to be 41 at the weekend. Like that's a long time apart. I mean, I'd seen him since then, but like I hadn't spoken to him for quite a long time, and he wouldn't have known anything I was doing with Oxygen Advantage. And interestingly, with their team, they had been starting to dabble with a bit of Wim Hof breathing. So they were starting to like look at that breathing piece. And I said, well, I was like, let's have I had a good relationship with him. I knew that he would trust me despite not knowing that that's what I was doing now. And it's like, let me tell you about this stuff because
Mm.
this is going to be more performance recovery based. Like there was a whole host of reasons as to why this is going to be. Um, and from that first conversation, you're talking about 12 months before it actually turned into actually delivering some sessions for the guys. So it is a long process often in pro sports because they're not just going to go, oh yeah, let's just get this guy in and apparently breathing's good. Like they want to know what's going on. They want to know the science behind it. They want everyone to be on the board. They want to, yeah. So it's a long process. I think people, sorry, just my tiniest little rant. People don't see like all that in the background that people are doing when they end up working in these areas. It's like people have been doing stuff for like decades to build up the experience and doing it, and it's yeah. People need to. Sometimes we just need to be patient when we're as coach. I'm speaking here to someone that's potentially a coach wanting to reach out into different areas. Like one, it doesn't happen overnight. Even if you look on someone else's Instagram and think that it happened for them overnight, it didn't. And yeah, we need to have that patience, and then we need to do the work to get that experience to then actually create some contacts that that might start to network into actually going into somewhere, but it takes time.
I'm glad you brought that in, and and if you're listening, if your niche is everybody, yay, go for it.
Yes.
There's the plus. There's a couple of things I wanted to respond to there because this came up on the few days training that I was on. I did exactly what you said, but this was actually before I'd done the OA training. Now I'm even more inspired to do it because I'm a big fan of sauna and cold therapy and using both
Nice.
for optimizing health.
Yeah.
And when I go to the local sauna, there's all these guys in there. There's a lot of guys in there, many of whom you can see really work out and some who don't. And that's, all of us are like that. There's this whole range. But almost without fail, they've done their workout, they've come into the sauna, and they're in the sauna, and the
Naked.
benefits of that, no, but that's irrelevant. So the benefits of that, as we know, are that it's cardiovascular, significant positive impacts on cardiovascular health from regular sauna use. And yet there they all are, huffing and puffing out through the
Yeah.
mouth because they can't breathe in the heat, and they're like,
Yeah.
so I went to the desk and said, I'm really noticing this in the sauna. I'd love to offer something on proper breathing
Yeah. Class.
protocols because then it's like, well, that's counterintuitive. And now that I understand more, the reasons why, because somebody's dispelling all that CO2 and then it's not crossing the blood-brain barrier and the vital organs. Is it going to be, they're basically probably, I mean, there's no research to support this statement I'm about to make, but they may well be reducing that positive impact back down by 50% just through dysfunctional breathing.
Yeah. Well, they'll be more, they're more upregulated. There's heat. The same with the ice bath. Like heat, whether it's a lot of heat or like not a lot of heat. So if it's hot or whether it's cold, they're both stresses. That's just called a thermal stress. And
Yeah.
how you breathe is one going to help you like stay calm in that situation. But if we're trying to do these things for like better health and better recovery, which is often part of the practices, then like we need to be using our breathing to not just intuitively, we tend to do it. Like we know when we feel our breathing go a bit, like we try to control it. It is something that's quite intuitive. And it's not different. This is the thing though, about that I get like the stuff we teach or the actual stuff that you teach isn't complicated. Like, yes, we can bamboozle ourselves with the science of what's going on in the background, but that's just understanding the mechanisms as to why it is. But the techniques, and this is the beauty of what Patrick's done with the oxygen advantage. Like the 3 case studies I did, like I didn't really know what I was doing, but I did know that they needed to breathe through the nose, practice slower breathing, get their rib cage moving, connect to their diaphragm, and depending on how sensitive they were to CO2, which we measure their Bolt score at, then just give them the appropriate exercises to do. As they get better, progress the exercises. As simple as that. Like it is no more difficult than that. Like understanding exactly what's going on at like a molecular level can get confusing and everything. And you know, I love that stuff. And I'm, you know, when I'm teaching the certification, like as much as Patrick, I want the coach or the instructor to understand the science so that they, as well as they can tell people what the thing is to do, that they understand themselves so that they don't get stuck when people ask them questions, or you have an understanding of the underpinning principles so that, like, you know, if someone isn't responding to X, that you know how to tweak that exercise or rational why they might want to try something just in a slightly different variation. But yeah, it's not almost to quote my dad, it's not rocket science, but my dad used to say rocket science actually isn't very complicated. You just need a lot of fuel and the thing just needs to go up. Like
so
you
it's
know
a
what I
bad
mean.
analogy, but yes, I know what you mean. Listen, I want to come back because there'll be people listening to this who don't know what a Bolt score is and also don't know what the benefits of proper breathing are. So let's take it right back to nuts and bolts, right? So like you, my Bolt score was always typically very low. I have had in the past, it's getting loads better, a very low tolerance for CO2.
Yeah.
And I knew that because I'd be gasping and air hungry and da 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 da, and just I'd panic. I can still get that slight feeling when we were doing some of the harder exercises. That feeling of panic starts to come up in me. I know where it comes from. So, and my Bolt score's now gone up to a decent level. I tested it at the airport yesterday in a
Nice.
stressful situation. It was around 28, and I was like, that'll do, and that's
In a
fine.
stressful situation, that's very good.
It's really good, isn't it? But you say in a stressful situation, but I've learned to regulate those stressful
Yeah.
situations through my breathing. And this is where I want to bring it back to basics
Yeah.
because there are so many situations in which something as simple as breathing well and learning how to down regulate your nervous system, learning what happens in rest and digest is so helpful. Like you said, you know, you don't need to understand all the science to understand, I feel better. Oh, I can stay calm in challenging situations. So let's talk about some of the benefits of better breathing and then the Bolt score.
Yeah. Well, look, I I come to all of this from a place of like, I like to understand stuff, or I feel like probably stronger than that. Like I feel like I need to understand something. So it's like, what is going on? Like, and then I want to be able to, if I can't explain it simply, then actually I just don't understand it well enough. So I like to think I tend to do a reasonable job in trying to break stuff down for people. So like we can take something that can sound quite complicated when we're talking about how the nervous system and our breathing interact together, and the autonomic nervous system, that we've got this sympathetic arm and the parasympathetic arm. But we can just go like there's two things: sympathetic, fight or flight. And it's people are like, oh, I've heard of that. You scared me with the sympathetic word. What does that mean? And the parasympathetic, what does that mean? But fight or flight, I've heard of that. Yeah, well, that's that stress response. That's the sympathetic tone. The opposite of the fight or flight is the rest digest, the relaxation response. That's the parasympathetic. That's the down regulating piece. And something that's not difficult necessarily to grasp is, and just very simple to understand, is that these two things aren't neither, it's not like a good and bad, black and white type of thing, because every breath you take, which sounds like a Sting song, doesn't it? Every breath you take, your heart rate on the inhale speeds up and is more sympathetic activated, more fight or flight response. And every exhale you take, it slows down your heart rate and is more parasympathetic promoting. So this interplay is happening every time you're breathing in and breathing out, just constantly. But what that allows us to do is go, oh, so one side of my breathing cycle, the inhale, is related to one arm of the nervous system, and the other side is related to the other. So if I want to down regulate, I want to spend some more time with my heart rate slowing down and my body shifting towards this relaxation response. So that's as simple as slowing my breathing rate down and potentially extending my exhalations. And then you might notice saliva building up in the mouth, and that saliva building up in the mouth is the physical sign of like, oh, I'm doing it, because the saliva is related to that rest, digest, relaxation response.
I didn't even realize that until this weekend. I was like, oh my gosh, of course, I'm getting ready to digest.
Yeah. And hence why when you feel stressed, your mouth's dry, because you're not having that. And this is something that I think my wife does a nice job of explaining this. I'm stealing this of her, that we have these two arms to the nervous system. And as she says, because your body can't do everything all at once. It's got a gazillion or whatever different things it's got to do. It can't do everything. So it can't send blood to your digestive system to digest food whilst you're working out or doing or off running as part of your fight or flight response. So it has to evaluate the environment, external and internal, and go, what's the appropriate things we're going to do? Because I can't do it all. So we're going to do these like fight or flight type of things now. And then when we feel calm and comfortable and safe again, then we'll go and do some of the restorative work. And the problem that too much of us have is that we're, one, so distracted from what's actually going on in our body that we just don't know where we are, and we spend too much time stressed. And two, we don't know how to actually use our breathing to bring us down. But I say that at the same time, we actually do, because if you see your mate go and then they haven't been running or whatever, and you see them and they look distressed because you're reading their breathing, you try to get them to calm down. How do you try to get them to calm down? You try to get them to control their breathing. And that's not because you've been a breathing expert, done any breathing training. Intuitively, you know that. So and you know it's the same when you feel yourself getting a little bit panicky, but when you're getting panicky, it can be difficult to regulate that. And that's where then understanding some of the other techniques that are no more complicated than putting some little pauses in between little breath cycles. But the way you start to then actually be able to control your stress response. And it's such a valuable tool that you're going to use for the rest of your life. It's gonna change, and it is going to change your life. And that's what people say when you work with them. They go, I've talked a lot about working with sports people, but I work with people that don't play sports as well. And when that tends to be more of a needing help with sort of stress management, anxiety, the stuff I do with sort of corporate clients, where it's like could be a little bit of focus and attention, but it still often tends to be a lot of stress and anxiety. Is like we're almost like revealing our own power to ourselves. Like, I'm actually this thing that feels like it's not in my control, my like stress response and my anxiety. I can actually control that. I can control it in the instant, but I can also build up my resilience or my tolerance to it by working on that CO2 tolerance or sensitivity that you mentioned, because there is a direct correlation between how prone someone is to anxiety and how sensitive they are to carbon dioxide buildup, because how it influences the brain. Can I tell one little story on that?
Go ahead.
And then I'll shut up. So there was I can't remember who I heard telling this story, but it's not a made up story. It's a real story. There was a lady that was born without I can't remember the part of the brain. Is it the amygdala or is it the hippocampus? It might be the hippocampus, where where the fear centers are. So she
Yeah.
literally couldn't process fear, or as in didn't have fear. So she could just walk off a cliff, and her life was very dangerous because she just didn't have any sense of fear. And they were trying to, one, help understand the brain, and two, help her because it's quite a dangerous way to live. And one of the things that they found out was when you if you control the gases someone's breathing in, so if you make someone breathe through a gas, you can manipulate the levels of carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide in the air that we breathe is around 0.04% that we breathe in, and we exhale about 4%. If you start to turn that up, you can make anybody have a panic attack, because there's an override in the brain of like, CO2 is good for the body, good for circulation, good for oxygen delivery, all these things, but everyone's got a tolerance, and too much of it is going to trigger the alarm bells to go like, whoa. And what is the panic attack? It's not big inhales, it's get rid of, because the brain is scared about how much the blood pH is changing, the blood's becoming too acidic. So it's like, get it out. And what they noticed with, so somebody this lady that didn't have the fear part of her brain for processing, never been as scared or afraid of anything in her life, when they got the right level of the CO2 high enough, gradually she had a panic attack, despite not having that part of her brain to trigger what you'd think would be in that process, because that CO2 has this overriding element. And I think that is
very instinctive then.
Yeah, it's there as an override. It's a protective override.
Yeah.
Those chemoreceptors in the brain are going to.
Yeah.
Yeah, to try and keep you alive.
Yeah, fascinating. Well, a couple of things again come back to. So for those listening, the BOLT score is what is measuring that tolerance for CO2, and you want it to be higher, your score to be in the realm of functional breathing. And just to say, because we talked a little bit about Wim Hof before we came on air, this is not about how long you can hold your breath. And I see a lot of kind of machismo with all of that, I can hold my breath for 2.5 minutes without effort, and I used to be like the one that would be going 30 seconds, and I'm done, even on the maximum breathlessness test.
Right.
So what I love about the BOLT score is because it's not that, it's much more that first impulse to breathe. So when those CO2 levels are going up, you're tracking, is somebody really struggling with that CO2?
Yeah.
Why is that an issue? Because we need CO2. There was all this stuff about it being a waste gas, because we need it to deliver the oxygen across the blood-brain barrier to the vital organs, etc., etc. So I just wanted to bring that in.
Well, it's just importantly on that, it's we're trying to find out what is your brain doing with your breathing on auto, not with willpower. How long can you hold your breath? Not after you've expelled all your CO2 from high ventilation pressure, how long you can hold your breath for. No, we're trying to find out what sensitivity the respiratory centers in your brainstem have to the buildup of CO2, because that is the primary thing that's driving the speed of your breathing, the size of your breaths, and the rhythm of your breathing throughout the day to day, and when you're sleeping at night, and all the things. And that is your baseline of breathing that all your other breathing is going to be based upon. Your breathing when you're stressed is going to be based upon your baseline. Your breathing when you're exercising is going to be based on your baseline. And finding out what that auto setting is the starting point for then actually being able to change that, literally, like that auto part of your breathing that you can control and you can change. And it is a trainable thing. You can create adaptations. And again, look, it's simple. How do you make your body more comfortable with a slightly higher level of CO2? You spend some time keeping CO2 in your body. The oxygen manager can break down, like in the next sentence, very simply, how do you keep a bit more CO2 within your body? You don't breathe out as much. There you go. How do you not breathe out as much CO2? You got two options. You either breathe much slower and smaller, or you just stop breathing and you hold your breath. But there's parameters that we put on these things to make sure that it's that it's safe. It's not only safe for anybody. It's like calming and relaxing and good and all those things. But it is as simple as that. And I think Gosh, I remember when I first read the oxygen advantage and just being like, what? It's not about oxygen. Wow. Like, it was just like, what?
Rename the carbon dioxide advantage.
Yeah. I know.
Patrick, you heard it here first.
No, it was like reading his words about like the thing that's making you breathe is not that oxygen's low, and putting a pulse oximeter on your finger and looking at it and going, "Oh yeah, I'm basically always full."
Yeah.
Like, go running and I'm still full. Oh, it only
Yeah.
drops when I hold my breath. That's interesting. What's going on there? And then, yeah, you get inquisitive if you like. But if people just want to have some control over their stress response and they want to feel better and be a bit healthier,
And sleep better,
and sleep
which
better,
is huge.
it
Huge.
isn't any more complicated
Mm.
than practicing breathing a bit calmer, a bit slower. Those two things all go together, and
Breathing through the
potentially,
nose,
well,
as your email
then
says. Keep
yeah,
it
and the
nasal.
nose, yeah, as my speedos say, not budgie smugglers say on the back, keep it nasal. The But that's from a point of view of like, well, the nose is going to help slow it down anyway because it provides more resistance, and your nose is designed for breathing. I can never think of a good analogy for this, but it's like, just let your nose do what it is. It's like, what do you mean I should use my nose? Well, because that's what it's there for. Like, it's prime real estate in the middle of your face. Like, do you know how much of the area is behind the back of it? Like, it'd be like, oh, I don't want to use my ears for listening today. I'm going to use my eyes. Like, well, just good luck. It's not going to work that well. Like, yeah, I can't
I
think of a
found
good
myself
analogy.
watching everybody on the plane and wanting to go as they're
Yeah.
dozing off yesterday. Listen, I want
Hmm.
to kind of ask you something on this more personal level. Like, why do you do what you do now with this? What inspires you? What motivates you to bring this work out in the world?
It's a good question, and I've got some like goosebumps as you just think as you've asked that question, and my mind immediately was like, just went, I have to. Um, I can't not. I think you can't. For me, I can't not share something that's had that much impact on myself and anyone else that I've taught it to. It's one of the things I love about working with other coaches, teaching the certification is like, if I work with one client, you can have an impact on their life. But when you work with a coach, you're like, well, I'm coaching that coach, and how many people are they going to go and
Mm.
work with? And as I say, it's such simple things, and you're always breathing. So it's not like you got to remember to like bring your breathing with you, put it in your bag. Like, you can do it at any point. You can check in on your breathing, and I think the more that I've been understanding it, the more I'm able to make it more simple to myself, and then simple how I teach and coach it. And then the more that I've, um, I guess, just practiced and worked on myself, I even get to the point sometimes where I think like, there's one thing, and Patrick's not like a massive fan of like checking respiratory rates because it fluctuates so much depending on how, because it responds to stress. Like when we're stressed, it goes up. So it's not as reliable as at all as the Bolt score. But understanding our sometimes the respiratory rate can be another data point and something that's useful, and it's easy for people um, to understand that, or it's less complex or weird. Like some people with the Bolt score, they're like, "Sorry, what is it? You're making me hold my breath," and like, for what? When do I allow myself to breathe in? So anyway, but they've done some studies to show that when you ask someone to count their breathing, and another reason why it's unreliable, when you ask someone to count their breathing,
No, it could be going one, two,
roughly
three, four, five.
they
Oh,
reduce it by 20%.
right.
So it means like when you ask someone to count their breathing to get their respiratory rate, it's actually probably 20% higher than what they report. But that being said, I guess sorry, a long way around to make my point. My point is that when you give your breathing some attention, i.e. count it, it slows by 20%. That's your breathing becoming automatically 20% potentially, or just slightly more efficient, because you're doing less of it. Efficiency, you shouldn't have to do as much. They can be smaller and they can be slower breaths. But without you even trying, but just you paying some attention, and not wholly, but maybe not that scientific sounding. But I have times where I wonder, is some of it just the fact that our breathing is going like, hey, you're very distracted. Just give me a tiny bit of your attention every now and again, and I'll keep us in check. Like, I know we're trying to do all the things and do all the stuff, but like just give me a little bit of your attention every now and again, and actually it can start to do some of the things it knows how to do. Because I do believe the body knows how to breathe. You know, you look at how we're designed, the functional anatomy of the rib cage, the diaphragm, how that moves, how that interplays together. There is a way for us to breathe as we've been designed to. And I believe the body does know how to do that. And I see it all the time when we teach people. You give them some of the right cues and just put them in the right positions to then just feel the right mechanics of breathing. And the body likes it because it goes, well, that feels nice. That feels easier. And it's like, oh yeah, that's how we used to breathe before life got in the way. So like, that's something I think is important to point out to people. Like, you're not trying to learn, you know, when you try to learn to do a handstand, for example, you're not designed to walk on your hands. You're designed to walk on your feet. Your glutes, your hips is there, and much more different structure to the shoulder. And when you try to learn how to do a handstand and walk on your hands, it feels really hard. It feels like you're trying to do something your body doesn't know how to do, and that's because it doesn't know how to do it. But when you're trying to retrain some of your breathing, at first it can feel a bit like difficult, or it doesn't feel quite right. It doesn't feel right. But it soon starts to just find its way with the right cues, in my experience, because it does know what it wants to do, and it does feel easier, more efficient, which is calmer, which is smaller, which is lighter, which is softer. Yeah.
Beautiful, thank you. A great summary. And I want to ask you where people can find you.
I'm just glad that you said before we went online, you said, if it only lasts 10 minutes, it means you've done a terrible job. So we've done all right. Where can you find me? I'm moving to North Wales soon. By the time this goes, well, no, you said you might put this out today. I'm not moving to North Wales today, but hopefully in the next couple of weeks. So people can find me in North Wales. If you can, that's going to be a little task for you. It's going to be like a Where's Wally. But no, on a serious note, but people are welcome to come when we moved in. We're going to be right in between the sea and the mountains. Can't wait. Anyway, yes, where can you actually find me or connect to me? Website is probreathwork.com. I've got a free Foundations of Breathing course and a free course for Breathwork for stress and anxiety. So feel free and please do check those out.
Fantastic. Yeah, those are fantastic, brilliant, really useful resources straight off the chute. So, and I know you've got more, but we're going to put the links below the show, so go check them out.
Yeah. And then Instagram is a good place to connect, ask questions, see what's going on a bit of a daily-ish basis. Jacko.david.jackson. I was once banned on TikTok because I was too dangerous from teaching breathing exercises. So that might, but I'm not banned anymore. And my video has had 1.6 million views, which I'm quite obviously proud is not the right word, is it? Because it's like, I'm just another TikTok idiot. But yeah, that might make people, if you're on TikTok, I don't even know what is my TikTok. I think it's Jacko Breathwork. I don't even know what my TikTok is.
I can't get my head around TikTok. Too many
TikTok's
things.
It's like Instagram, but just more dancing.
Okay, so please send those links to me. I don't
Okay,
think
yeah,
I've
we'll
already
do.
got them. Drop them to me afterwards and I'll link them up here. Thank you for bringing your expertise and your experience and your story over here. For anybody who wants to know more about breathing, I'm sure we both recommend the Oxygen Advantage, and you can
Yeah,
do that with Jacko directly if you can't get over to Ireland to Galway, or you can just make different choices. Everybody finds
yeah,
who they resonate with. Thanks. It's been great to chat all things breath, and it's been great to come from these different worlds of breath work actually,
yeah,
and to bring in the fundamental importance of understanding the science in my world and perhaps in your world, to lean into the parts that we can't know of the brain mind or the science mind. And you
yeah.
talked actually about that in the way that you said, well, look, sometimes that can bamboozle people, but actually, what makes me feel good? And
Mm,
some of that might be attached to, kind of the mystery or the things that we're healing that have created the stress patterns in the first place.
yeah,
So
yeah.
great.
Cool, awesome. Oh,
Anything you
there,
want to
can
say
I
to end? Yeah.
just because you mentioned about the training, I'm teaching with another master instructor, Georgie Lawler. She's specialised in
Oh,
female breathing and female health.
yeah.
23rd to 25th of June, so 3 days, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, 23rd, 25th of June in Nottingham, UK.
Great. And I know Georgie's name came up in the program as well because there were a few of us asking about a relationship with hormonal cycles. And I
Yeah,
know that
she's
she's done
amazing,
quite a lot of work
amazing.
on that.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
yeah, go check out that training and give them a look and see what resonates for you. Thank you for your
Cool.
time. It's been a pleasure. I'll let
Yeah,
you know
no,
when this
always
goes live.
pleasure of
Okay,
mine.
so we're going to stop there and give you an enormous thanks, Jacko.
Thanks for having me.